Well, good morning, Northeast. I hope you're doing well. Whether you're joining us here in the room or if you're joining us online, why don't you guys stand up? We're going to start our service through song this morning, all right? Let's sing about our only King. So I've got a couple of announcements for you guys, but don't sit down because I'm just going to we're going to go straight through them and we're not going to do the pop-up book thing where we sit down and then I'm going to make you stand back up. Okay, so first up, tomorrow night we are celebrating a birthday here at Northeast. Celebrate Recovery is having a birthday. 8 years of changing lives here at Northeast. If you haven't had a chance to get out to celebrate recovery, it's absolutely phenomenal. I really encourage you guys to. Tomorrow's a perfect. It's going to be here at the church, I believe. Either way, October 30th, we have more information on our website. If you are kind of new to Northeast, not really sure what we're about, who the leadership is, you want to kind of come check that out, that's the event for you. So kind of mark it on your calendar.
Honey in the rock, water in the stone, manna on the ground, no matter where I go. I don't need to worry now that I know everything I need you've got. There's honey in the rock. Praying for a miracle, thirsty for the living well. Only you can satisfy. Sweetness at the mercy seat. Now I've tasted, it's not hard to see. Only you can satisfy. There's honey in the rock. 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 Freedom where the spirit is, bounty in the wilderness. You will always satisfy. There's honey in the rock, water in the stone, manna on the ground, no matter where I go. I don't need to worry now that I know everything I need you got. There's honey in the rock, purpose in your plan, power in the blood, healing in your hands. God has said that it's done. Everything you did's enough. I keep looking, I keep finding, you keep giving, keep providing. I have all that I need. You're all that I need. I keep praying, you keep moving. I keep praising, you keep proving. I have all that I need. You're all that I need. I keep looking, I keep finding. You keep giving, keep providing. I have all that I need. You're all that I need. I keep praying, you keep moving. Keep on praising, you keep proving. I have all that I need. You're all that I need. I have all that I need. You're all that I need. There's honey in the rock, water in the stone, manna on the ground, no matter where I go. I don't need to worry now that I know. It's everything I need you got. There's honey in the rock, purpose in your plan, power in the blood, healing in your hands. Started knowing when you said it is done. Jesus, Jesus, who you are is enough. There's honey in the rock. 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 Oh, how sweet it is to trust in you, Jesus. Oh, how sweet it is to trust in you, Jesus. Oh, how sweet it is to trust in you, Jesus.
Now I long to breathe the air of heaven, where pain is gone and mercy fills the streets. To look upon strengthened down in faith. And in the end, we see that it was worth it when He returns to wipe away our tears. And there will be a day when all will bow before Him. And there will be a day when death will be no more. Standing face to face with He who died and rose again. Singing holy, holy is the Lord. And on that day, we join the resurrection and stand beside the heroes of the faith. And with one voice, 1,000 generations sing, worthy is the Lamb who was slain. On that day, we join the resurrection and stand beside the heroes of the faith. And with one voice, 1,000 generations sing, Lamb who was slain. Forever He shall reign. There will be a day when all will bow before Holy, holy is the Lord. So let it be today. We shout the hymn of heaven. The angels and the saints, we raise a mighty roar. Glory to our God, who gave us life beyond the grave. Holy, holy is the Lord. Yes, holy, holy is the Lord. Holy, holy is the Lord.
All right, and we're going to go ahead and pray for communion. So if you would pray with me. Dear God, thank you so much for this time of the week set aside for us to focus on you. Thank you for this time of the service, for this time to focus on what you've done for us. You've died for us and you rose for us. And in doing so, you've made it possible for us to be. Help us.
Morning. Morning. Hey. Awkward transition. I was supposed to do that in the dark, and you saw me come to the stage. Usually I just appear up here, and so welcome those of you who are new with us, new to Northeast. We're certainly glad you're here. Welcome to those of you who are joining us online or streaming us this morning. I had a little pop-up on my iPad this morning that told me that you were there, that we were streaming at 9 o'clock, so welcome, and I'm glad you're here. We're in a series talking about grace, and we've been kind of discovering like where grace is throughout Scripture, and we've been basically exploring the fact that grace was present at creation, in the garden, even in the midst of the fall and failure. Grace was found in a covenant made with God and his people, and that grace was discovered in the law. So I'm going to talk about more of that because the progression of all this is a restoration that God wants to bring with a partnership between his creation, humankind, and him. And it's a beautiful story when you discover the whole thing. So if you haven't been with us for the whole time, I encourage you to go back and listen to it. I want to talk to you this morning about any awkward moment in your life, like when you look back at the history of your life, phases of life, like when you were a child. And I know like sometimes this can be hard because some of us have experienced certain traumas at certain parts of our life. But I just want to talk about talking about just the human experience of maturity. Think about your growing up years, maybe the time that you would choose to go back to. Now, I know some of you guys might be like 8 years old right now, and you're like, I don't know if I want to go back to when I was 7. But point is, all of us have gone through these weird times, right, where we want to go back. There's times that I have people that I know who always reminisce about great times that were in their past, and I always think, man, I hope I didn't peak when I was 18. I hope I didn't peak in high school, you know? I hope that wasn't the best time of my life. But for some people, that may have been the time. You could go, man, I would go back to that. And so whatever it is, the time you would think this is the best season of my life. And then think about the one that was kind of the worst. Not because of the things that are happening or trauma around you, but I was thinking like in terms of just like human development. Like, would you choose to go back to like junior high? Would you choose to experience that again? You know, the awkwardness of like, it seemed like in grade school, everybody liked each other and I was always like good with things. And then got into junior high and I wasn't good at anything. I didn't feel like I was good at anything and everything's changing. My feet were bigger than the rest of my body. It was weird, you know, everything just gets out of whack. It's just awkward and weird. And if you're in junior high right now and you're feeling weird that I'm talking about you, I apologize. But the truth is, like, we wouldn't necessarily choose to go back to just some awkward times in our life that are just awkward because of the phases of life that it is. And so it's even more amazing to me when we talk about Jesus and we talk about what God did in grace when in order to heal what was broken, what we did, right? So he creates this beautiful place for us. It's perfect. It's for us. He gives us dominion over it. We're supposed to manage it and steward it well. And he gives us one rule, and humankind can't follow that one rule, just like to trust him versus trust ourselves. That's too hard. And so we screw it up. It gets screwed up. I know we blame Eve, but it's our story. It's our story. And then he goes about like trying to like put together then his will for us. He makes promises to a man named Abraham, and then he says, "Look, you're going to be my people. I'm going to be your God. I'm going to walk with you. This is a relationship I want with you." And then he gets to this season where they're now a people and they're a nation, but they've only known like other like rulers. They've been enslaved, and so they've only known pharaohs. That the rules change with every pharaoh, and so now they're free people that are their own people, and God says, look, I want you to be clear about what I want for you, and so he gives them the law. And it's a way of like, it was a gift to them to say, look, this is what I desire for you. And most of the laws were about how we relate to him and how we relate to each other. For the sake of each other. That's why he gave the law. It was clear expectations of what he wanted. And so there's this thing that I think started to happen is we started to think that this is God's standard and we can live up to this. God, we can do this. And there was actually people who thought that they could do this. They had their own will to follow this law, and they weren't living according to the law. There was a whole heck of a lot of people that were running into that law and discovering they couldn't do it. And it was failure every year. They'd offer sacrifices year after year after year, grieving year after year the fact they couldn't live up to God's standard. And so once and for all, he sends Jesus. Once and for all. And this is the amazing thing about grace when you think about Christ. This is the amazing thing. If you were to choose, if you were in like supreme power position, like you could write the script, you were in complete control, and you could choose when to come into life, what would you choose? I'd probably choose like early 20s, you know. I had hair. I was playing competitively sports at the time, you know. I would have chose then. I would have just like appeared in my complete best form. That would be my choice. That's what I would have done. I don't know about you. But he doesn't do that. He comes in the humblest form that he could think about. Think about this. The creator of the universe comes as a baby and has to learn to walk just like you and I did. Has to learn to toddle. Has to learn to speak, to form words. Has the frustration of wanting something without the ability to communicate it. The creator of the universe experienced all that. Experienced all the things about growing up that gets awkward and weird. Jesus was a junior hire. He felt awkward. His body went through changes. It was weird. His friends changed. It was weird. Jesus experienced all that. He knew what it was like to be tempted. He knew what it was like to still was, but to wait on God. He knew all that. He knew it all. He comes in the form of a child. He experiences all the things that we experience in life. This is grace. Like Jesus in the flesh is like the epitome of grace. Think about this. When Jesus comes in the flesh, what he and become vulnerable, right? So my first point here is that grace is Jesus taking on flesh and becoming vulnerable. This is what John chapter 1 says. John, writing in kind of poetic language, says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Which is kind of what we talked about in the first part of this series. We talked about that Jesus was present in creation. God knew it all along that he was going to be sending Jesus. He knew the story. He wasn't surprised by any of this. And so in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning, and through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. So Jesus is present in creation, but then he chooses to not just be absent of his creation, but he chooses to come close to us. Emmanuel, God with us. You ever have moments when you have this decision in your head whether you're going to get involved in something or not? You ever have those moments where you're just trying to decide if you're going to engage in something or not? Last week, I was at my house, and I was going out to get my garbage cans that were at the curb, and as I was exiting my front door, a car went by my house at a high rate of speed, like probably doing about 85 miles an hour. And I was like, whoa, holy smokes. And so I'm walking out, and as I'm walking out of my driveway, I noticed that there's kids playing basketball on the street at the corner, and other parents were walking out of their houses as they heard this car zoom by. So I walk out, we're all looking at each other, we're all kind of chatting a little bit, like, whoa, can you believe that? And then we hear, I live in a big circle, okay? Some of you guys know it because you trick or treat there. Yeah. It's the good circle. People flock into my neighborhood for trick or treating because it's just a big circle, we have some sidewalks, and I think that's, but anyway, so I hear, we're hearing that this car is now at the other end of the street and it is going around the corner, and we're hearing the tire squealing around the corner. And then as we're talking, we can hear it hit the other corner way at the other end. We're hearing it, squealing tires around corners, and then as we're talking, we hear it coming around again. So moms are scooping up their 2-year-old that's in a driveway. People are moving, kids are getting out of the street. I have my garbage cans in hand, and I'm thinking to myself, do I get involved? You know what I'm thinking, right? Do I just go ahead and put these in the street? And so as I'm thinking this in my head, I'm thinking, okay, if I put these in the street, then they're going to swerve to avoid the cans, and they're going to hit me. So I just stood there with my cans, and sure enough, the car came around again and zoomed past at the same rate of speed. And so we were like all incredulous. Like we were like, so this now everybody's dander's up, right? I mean, everybody's like, yeah, do we get involved? Do we get involved? And anyway, so it goes around, and we hear it coming around again for a third pass. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, I did nothing, really. I just stood on the curb, although I did do this. On the third pass, I pulled my phone out because I thought, at least I'm going to capture like a license plate or something. One of the other guys, one of the other parents, hops in a car and goes the other way, is going to go head to head with this car. I know. It's getting dicey like that. And so I don't know what's going to happen. It's like, it's like unbelievable, right? Because like you get mad parents and things go sideways. I mean, it's just, so they around the corner, I see them hit the brakes, the car slows down, swerves around them, and they come around again. Another parent jumps into the street and tries to stop them by putting their hands up. Car swerves around them, slows down a little bit, but then I'm just taking pictures. And as they look at me taking pictures, they're like, we're gonna kill you. And I'm like, this is why I don't get involved. I mean, nothing happened to this. But my point is, like, when we choose, I mean, think about it. Why is it that when things happen, there's this hesitancy for us to engage in it, like to get involved in it? Because we know when we get involved in it, that it probably or could create some vulnerability for us. It's just the nature of it. Like, we don't want to engage because if we engage, it creates vulnerability. Like it makes us susceptible to that something might go wrong with us if we engage in this. And so we tend to, at times, hold back. And that was the truth. I could have done nothing. I would have been just fine, standing in my driveway, just watching it happen. But I chose to pull out my phone and get engaged a little bit in this situation. But it made me vulnerable. I want you to understand that this is Jesus, right? This is the story of Jesus as he sees this stuff happening on our planet. Like, how are we going to get this right? How are we going to make this right? The choice to come in the form of a person like us, human beings, just like us, to walk amongst us, to be with us, is him engaging with us, and in a way, it made him vulnerable. Appreciate that. The fact that Jesus could have remained in heaven. There could have been another solution. It could have been like, well, hey, we told you, you guys didn't live up to the law. Sorry. That could have been the solution. But it wasn't the solution for God. Because of his grace, he chose to come and live amongst us. And in doing so, he makes himself vulnerable. Vulnerable to the point of death. That's his grace for us. And so we can like look at this story, and we look at Jesus, and we think about him being in flesh, and it's like sometimes this just drives me a little bit crazy. We recognize that he came in flesh for us, and that he's so gracious to us. But what kills me is that we're not very gracious with each other. It just seems like this weird thing. It's like this weird disconnect where we love the idea that Jesus loved us so much that he came in bodily form to be vulnerable for us. He took a punishment we deserved. He made himself vulnerable to do that. And yet we would pull back from people who need us. Or we would look at other people and we would judge them in the way that we weren't judged. It's crazy to me. When you read on the story, John chapter 1, verse 14 says this, the Word became flesh, and he made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. You see, Jesus, he didn't come to judge us. He came to walk amongst us because he was full of grace and truth. In other words, the law that was trying to be followed and trying to be like in this self-righteous way, they were trying to say that they were following the rules. God says, look, I'm gonna walk amongst you, and I'm not gonna come against you. I'm not gonna come there as a judge of you. I'm not gonna condemn you people. I'm gonna come and I'm gonna walk amongst you, and I'm gonna be full of grace when I'm present with you. And I'm also gonna live the truth. I'm gonna speak the truth. You're gonna understand. And so Jesus, as he's teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, he says, you've heard it said, but I tell you. You've heard it said this, but I tell you. He brought truth to us. So if there's anything that we ought to be about, it's like, man, we really want to understand Jesus. We really want to know what it was like when God was in human form. How did he act and behave? What was his attitudes and behaviors? What was his expression of love and grace to people? Like, this should be what we just live for, is to understand Jesus and the way he acted and behaved, because this was God in flesh. And grace is displayed in that Jesus demonstrated God's love. Grace, it just exudes from every story you see as Jesus interacts with people. It's just grace. It's grace, it's grace, it's grace. Verse 16 says, out of this fullness we have all received grace in the place of grace already given. In other words, there was already grace shown to us. We already weren't living up to the law. Yet there was grace given in that Jesus, full of grace, comes. And we all received grace then. It's extended to every one of us. To us, but we've all received it. In other words, the people who right now aren't in this room because of whatever they choose to do or they reject God are still receiving grace. The grace is extended to them. He loves them. For the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth come through Jesus Christ. And then verse 18, I think this is a powerful verse. Listen, no one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God, is in the closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. In other words, like, if anyone is ever to understand, if people around us, like for us, like to understand what God would want, it's Jesus. Like, we can't see God, we don't know how God would act in skin, but we now can because of Jesus. Like, we can actually see how God would act if he was amongst us. This is the beauty of it and of us. Think about this. When you look at the story of Jesus, when you look at the Gospels, one of the things that I love about it is the way grace kind of is a theme throughout all of Jesus' interactions. Even when he gathers his disciples together, and so this story's been written, this story's being told of the disciples. I would imagine as they were writing it down, there were some of them that wanted to go, hey, Matthew, I know you're writing a story, and it had in there a little bit. I just, can we just not talk about the part where I didn't have enough faith to do the thing? Can we leave that part out? I mean, it was a dark chapter in my life. Can we not tell that story? Or Thomas would be like, hey, I noticed I made it into the pages of your story there, the narrative, and I just think it's a little bit transparent. Like that time I doubted and I asked to actually put my finger, I was just, it was a joke. I was just joking at the time. How would you handle it if your failures were on display in a book that would be studied by people and churches and generations to come? How would you feel? Would you want to be like, hey, can we not put that part in there? I mean, it was a bad day for me. How would you feel? But the fact that the story of Jesus contains story of disciples who were learning to walk with Jesus. And that the people that were closest to Jesus, the ones he chose to extend his mission to and to take his mission to the world, were not perfect people. Up until the hours before Jesus is crucified, they're denying him. I would imagine Peter was like, hey, can we not talk? Do I have to put that part? Well, at least put the part where he kind of restored me. I mean, come on. Oh, it's going to be in there. Okay, good. But the fact that they put this all in there, that they were transparent and vulnerable this way, only speaks to the grace that they knew of Jesus. They weren't afraid to admit that they didn't have it all together. People. No, it's about grace. Grace and grace. And so he extends it to his disciples. But even the people that weren't his disciples, when Jesus interacts with them, I mean, think about the stories. I've gotten in a few conversations with people, and I've talked about Jesus and the way Jesus interacted with people. And we have a hard time believing that Jesus didn't call out sin, that Jesus didn't condemn sin, that Jesus didn't speak harshly to people. And they'll quote a couple of passages to me, or a couple of instances in Scripture. They'll say, well, the woman at the well. And I'll say, what about the woman at the well? John chapter 4. What about the woman at the well? What is it about there that you think that Jesus somehow calls her out? You see, Jesus encounters this woman at a well. His disciples go into town to get bread. Jesus hangs at the well. I think he knows what's going to happen. This Samaritan woman comes. They should be at odds because of their races being different, but that isn't the case. Jesus talks to her. And so her reaction or response is rather surprising. Like, why are you talking to me? One, I'm a woman, and two, I'm a Samaritan, and you're a Jew. Why? You know, or at least in your head, your people think you're better than we are. Why are you talking to me? And Jesus is like, and so they get in this conversation. And they're talking about water, and he's talking about water, and he's talking about, water that never runs dry. And she's like, whoa, I want some of that water. I want water that never ends. And so he says this to her. She says, sir, give me something to drink. And he says, verse 16, go call your husband. Our young people can speak about how they're being encouraged and what they're seeing about God. And those who are more seasoned can share with how they're experiencing God. And together, as the church, we can retreat together and have this experience. And so I'm really jazzed about this retreat. So on our website, our events page, you can find out more information about it. It's coming up in November. Just wanted to put it in front of you. Our cafe people are awesome. They brought me a caramel macchiato, which I love them for that. But listen, I want to encourage you. Our cafe is open. If you want to hang out, connect with each other, it's down there. It's great coffee. We don't do it to be bougie. We do it to encourage community. That's why we do it, because we want you to experience love and community today. And so come find it in the cafe. Love you guys. Have a great week.
Jesus.